limestone. It's a yellow limestone, so it's very attractive in colour. And you'll notice that where buildings are fairly newly constructed in the Cotswolds, the colour of the stone is quite pale. It's a very pale yellow colour, and as it ages it darkens and becomes more honey coloured. So the older buildings that you see in the towns and along the roadsides, they tend to be a much darker yellow colour because the stone has weathered and aged like that and changed its colour. So Cotswold stone is an excellent building stone, and anything that's built within the Cotswolds these days has to be built from Cotswold stone or faced in Cotswold stone. Okay. Now, what about the wool bit about it? Well, wool. This was the major export from England to the rest of Europe from the late 12th century right the way through until the 15th century. Throughout the whole of the Middle Ages, wool produced here in the Cotswolds was exported to the weaving towns of northern Europe, and even down as far as northern Italy to Lombardy, that area as well. But to Ypres, Ghent, Bruges, the big weaving towns of northern Europe, they were supplied and were willing to pay top prices for the raw wool that was produced in the Cotswolds. So England was the major European wool producer for cloth, because of course there were no man-made fibres back in those days. Cotton wasn't around, it was wool, and the Cotswolds breed produced just the right type of wool for reasonable grade cloth to be woven from it, and that's why, as I say, it powered the looms of Europe for hundreds and hundreds of years. And the export of wool, every sack of wool that was exported, the exchequer got some tax from it, and so it made the country very wealthy in the Middle Ages due to the wool trade. So it was the major exporter. They called it the jewel in the realm, really, the wool trade back in the Middle Ages. And in Parliament in London, you know, we have the House of Lords and the House of Commons in the UK Parliament. Well, the House of Lords, the upper house, the seat of the Speaker, and the Speaker is traditionally was the Lord Chancellor. Nowadays they've been renamed the Lord Speaker. The seat of the Lord Speaker in the House of Lords is the woolsack. That's what they call it. Who is sitting on the woolsack? The Lord Speaker. And the woolsack is just what it says. It's a sack of wool. A very nice sack of wool. It's big. It's like a huge cushion with a sort of a crimson covering, and inside it is stuffed full of wool. And the idea was, from Elizabethan times, from the 16th century, that the Lord Chancellor, now the Lord Speaker, would be sitting his or her derriere on the wealth of the nation, and when they were legislating they would be fully aware that they were sitting on the wealth of the nation, the wool sack. So that's how it came about. Anyway, there you go. So the wool trade was important. Of course, the wool trade has declined considerably in the since the 18th century, really. We do have a lot of sheep, but as you travel the Cotswolds today, you won't see that many. In fact, first person to spot a flock of sheep doesn't get a prize, but you get the kudos of alerting us to the fact. But you could just imagine back in the Middle Ages, tens of thousands of heads of sheep would be grazing on the hillside. And in fact, in Stow-on-the-Wold, our fourth port of call today, when they used to have the sheep fairs there to sell the sheep, which were held usually twice a year in the town of Stow-on-the-Wold, they would buy and sell up to 20,000 sheep, head of sheep, on each day of the fair. So it just shows you how important, how numerous sheep were back in the Middle Ages here. I am reliably informed that we have 22 million sheep in the United Kingdom as I speak. So we've still got a lot of sheep, but you're not going to see huge numbers of them down here. They will be mainly in the Lake District, in Scotland, in the hills of Wales, down in the West Country. That's where you'll see them, not so much here in the Cotswolds. Look at the stone building coming up on the right. That's a newly built Cotswolds building. Doesn't it look lovely here on the right? Look, this new one. The dormer windows, the 3 dormer windows. So you can see what the stone looks like when it's new, that pale yellow colour, before it starts to age. Wool, by the way, produced here is a byproduct of the lamb industry now. So we might have 22,000 sheep in the country, in the UK, but most of them are bred, well, they're all bred really for lamb and export, a lot of it to France, who love British lamb, and the wool, the fleece, is a byproduct, and it is used mostly for coarser grade textiles, so tweeds, textiles, that sort of thing. That's what wool from British sheep is used for these days, not for making cloth as it was back in the Middle Ages. We made cloth here, of course, but the raw wool exported to Northern Europe, that was the money spinner, basically, back in the old days. They had various different attempts to boost demand for wool when the wool trade was in the doldrums, because they would always panic when the wool trade declined a little bit. And one of the measures that was taken in Queen Elizabeth I's time was that all men must wear woolen caps to church on Sundays. This was a law, Parliament giving a helping hand. So if you were a man, woe betide you if you did not attend church wearing a woolen cap. You had to take it off, of course, at the door. The gentry were exempted to that because they wore silk hats, but if you were just an ordinary man, a woolen cap was essential. There was also a law passed in now 1678, after the Civil War, when the restoration of the monarchy took place. They passed a law to help the wool trade that anyone who died within the realm, unless they had died of the plague, had to be buried in a woolen shroud. And that upset people, because if your loved one died, you wanted them to be buried in their best Sunday suit, not in a woolen shroud made of English wool. But that's what Parliament had legislated. And if you didn't comply with the law, the fine was £5, which was a huge amount of money. It was a year's salary to some agricultural labourers back in the 17th century. And so, and if you had so many days to swear an affidavit to say that you had complied with the Act, the Burial in Woolens Act of 1678. And as I say, if you didn't, you were fined £5, and the informant, so the person who told on you, they got half of that. So there we are. And there was an expression which we had in this country then, it was, and it's still here today, you can't pull the wool over my eyes. Ever heard that expression? You can't pull the wool over my eyes? We use it a lot here. It means you can't fool me, I'm not dead yet. Because if you pulled the wool over somebody's eyes, you were pulling on their shroud, on their corpse. And so you can't pull the wool over my eyes, because I'm not dead yet. You can't fool me yet, I'm not dead. So that's where the expression originated, apparently, from that act. It was repealed, by the way, in 1814. So if anyone dies in the country now, they don't have to be buried in a woolen shroud. It's not illegal. 1814, they abolished that particular law. So you can see how the wool trade's been important over the years. Now this town on our right here is called Whitney. You see it on the site, Whitney. See? And as well as being David Cameron's old parliamentary constituency, remember him? He was the Prime Minister